So this presentation is called Building Healthy Communities, and we'd like to welcome back Nefertiri Weeks. Nefertiri?
Great. So this talk, it's going to be a little bit different than what we're used to. This is another sociological concept that I learned that I thought that we could use to help create healthier communities amongst ourselves. I know a lot of us have lived in all types of different communities, religious communities, secular communities, and one of the questions that I often ask myself is, what is it that makes a community have a particular quality where you come into that community and you feel loved and accepted and you feel really good there, versus another type where you go in and you're like, oh, I just don't like it there. So what is going on in these different places that would make us feel a particular way? And it's always interesting to me. And one of the answers is that different communities have different cultures, right? So for instance, in my sociology department, there's a definite hierarchy within the department, and there's a particular way that you would act around this person versus like the chair of the department. The professors have their own community, and then the students have their own community, and then the undergraduate students. It's all very segregated and hierarchical, and it has a particular type of vibe when you're there. And so we're trying to build and understand the Baha'i community. And what is the Baha'i community? What does that mean? And there's a lot of references, especially from Abdul-Baha, where he talks about, you know, when you meet a fellow Baha'i, it should be like you are meeting a family member, a fellow beloved of God. And I believe that I'm kind of preaching to the choir here because we have a very beautiful community already. So I was telling Yusuf maybe all of this information is kind of a moot point because we already have such a beautiful community. But he said, Muhammad said that it's okay to remind and just to be conscious of these things that make really healthy communities. And so in sociology, what I introduced yesterday, this concept of agency versus structure. And so this is kind of the interface between there's a particular structure in the community versus what is my place in that community. Am I limited by that community? Am I empowered by that community? Am I oppressed by that community? Am I getting exploited by that community? Am I actually receiving from the community? So there's like a difference in like the relationships within the community. And so there's a whole facet of studies where they even ask, what the heck is a community? Like, what is it? When you're in a grocery store and you're all shopping and checking out, are you in a community? You know what I mean? Not necessarily. You don't actually feel like, oh, I'm going to the city market community, right? Like you don't really think of it like that. So what the heck is a community? And one definition that I'm just going to put forward as an idea is it's a network of social relations where people are networked together, where there's mutuality and emotional bonds. But the Baha'i community is so much more than that, right? So academia is so dry when you get these definitions, but it's a way to like make building blocks. And so sometimes people ask, you know, what is a community? Is it a thing? Is it a process? Is it a feeling? Is it an emotion? Like, what the heck is it? And so if we kind of take this idea that maybe it's a network, one thing that people do actually there's a professor in my department, she actually gets hired to come into organizations to measure what is the measure of the community within a particular organization. Is it healthy? Is it unhealthy? Is it stable? Is it unstable? Is it going to collapse at any minute? Is it resilient? Can it like overcome a crisis? Things like that. So she'll like go in and she knows how to like measure mathematically. Well, your community measure is on like a 0.5 and this is where you have these problems. And so I just thought I would go through some of the basic ideas of this to show the difference between a healthy community and not a healthy community. A strong community versus a community that is not strong. And so one of the things that makes a community really strong is that there's a free flow of knowledge and information and love among the community members, right? So you can go into a community and you can find that there's a lot of cliques, right? It's like, well, I only hang out with Dieter and Neal, and I don't hang out with all of you. So don't even come over here, which is something that Ruby experiences in middle school quite a bit. And I'm constantly trying to talk her through, like, okay, let's deal with this clique of girls over here, and then we'll deal with the football players over here. And how is it that you can navigate through this and not feel like you're getting your heart broken all the time because this girl's not talking to me? But I've actually experienced this among adults. So that's one of the reasons why I find it a little bit interesting. So in order to do this, I just want to introduce a couple different concepts. One is called nodes and one is called ties. And Neal's heard all this stuff before. And so what they do is they'll go in and they'll talk to the people in a community and find out who talks to who feels comfortable with who trusts who. If you're in a crisis, could I borrow $5? Could I borrow $5 from Colin? Could I borrow $5 from Kathy? Like, well, Reg wouldn't loan me $5. I probably couldn't call him, you know. So anyway, they measure the strengths of the ties between the individuals that tells them how close and cohesive that community is. Okay, so let me show you a couple different community patterns. So I don't know if you guys can see this, but see this one up here? These dots would be the nodes. And then the ties between them, these are called the ties. And so this is a very centralized community. This is where there's a person in the middle, and they know all these people, but all these people don't know each other. So this is not a cohesive community. This is a very centralized community with one person in the middle. But you can think of this for yourself. You can think, well, here I am in the middle, and I know this person, this person, this person, this person, and they don't talk to each other, right? But it's not always like this. This is just kind of an idea. This is called a decentralized community. So this is where you have a tie that's connecting two different groups or three different groups. But again, not necessarily a cohesive community, right? So if something happens with the relationship between this node and this node, right, and this gets broke off, well, then these two groups will just break apart. And so these can be strong and they can be weak. Like, you know, this relationship between this person and this person could be really strong. This could be like your brother, right? Your brother has their own set of friends. I have my own set of friends. I'm not sharing my friends with those friends, right? So you can think about how there's all kinds of decentralized networks everywhere you go. And, you know, they always say we're only separated by 6 degrees of separation. So if one person knows one person, one knows one person who then like knows Brad Pitt, whatever, right? So this is just a way to think about this. The problem with these types, these cliques like this, if you let's say that you have a church, right, and there's 100 people in the church, and they are in groups like this, these are crisis-prone communities. These can break apart very easily if a crisis should come, and there isn't a flow of information from like this person to this person or this person to this person. It's interesting to think about. So then this is a hierarchical community. This is where there's a person up here, this person's in charge, right? And this person passes down directions to these people. And then this person passes down to these people. So these people don't necessarily ever even meet this person up here in charge. So this is very common of the American bureaucratic structure, right? So if you get a job in corporate America, you very much may be dealing with a structure like this. The head honcho said, you're getting a paid demotion and that you can't even talk to the person in charge, right? This is very common, but one thing that's really interesting in modern like Google, like technology communities is that they realize that the hierarchical structure is actually the worst structure that you can have. The reason being is that there isn't a free flow of knowledge, inspiration, ideas. Like the hierarchical structure is really unhealthy for having communities where there's new ideas coming out or there's like resiliency happening, right? This down here is what they would call a resilient and cohesive community. It's a community where everybody knows everybody else. And one of my professors was telling me that she actually went into this one organization and she came out, they got like the highest score they'd ever gotten in the community structure itself. And they were like, this is impossible. Like, there are no communities where everybody knows everybody and feels like they could trust everybody and ask everybody for assistance or give everybody assistance. This is very, very rare. But then she found out that in the principles of that particular community, it was a rule that everybody had to meet and know the names of everybody else in the entire community. And this principle, which is one of the things I was getting to yesterday, is that the 12 principles, they actually have this guiding foundation for communities themselves, right? And so it's an interesting way to think about how communities can be more strong, more resilient if we come under a crisis or whatever we're doing. I mean, we are trying to do something really huge in the world. We are trying to shine the light of Baha'u'llah on a global level. And so I wanted to share a couple readings in line with this. I'm not actually saying that we need to have a community that looks like this. The other problem with this is that you can have a closed-knit, closed-minded community, right? And so there's a difference between strong ties between people. Like, let's say we had a cult, right? And we were all like, we're all just talking to each other and we're not letting anybody else in. And we were very cultish about this. This is actually also not healthy. You also want to have weak ties where you talk to everybody and you like, and I believe that when you read the writings of Abdul-Baha in The Secret of Divine Civilization and many of his references in the selections of the writings of Abdul-Baha, when he talks about how it is that communities can be strong, that it actually does mirror what the sociology says about what makes a strong community resilient. And so the other thing is that there's a debate in sociology over that. If you ever go into academia, what you will find is that they really like to debate about the most minuscule things. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Everything's a big argument, and they're like writing these journal articles, just arguing over the slightest minutia that who even cares, right? I have a capacity to tolerate it to some extent, but on another level, it gets a little burdensome. Anyway, they have a debate over whether or not it matters what the quality of the people are that are in the network. Is it just the ties? Is it just the structure of the ties? Like, this is one structure, this is another structure. Is it just the structure that matters? Or is it the quality of the ties themselves that matter? And I think that Abdul-Baha solves this riddle. It's both the ties and it's the quality. I'm going to read you just a small selection from The Secret of Divine Civilization, wherein he is asserting in this book that in order to have a healthy society, people need to be knowledgeable, they need to be educated, right? There needs to be sharing amongst the people, there needs to be distribution that is fair, right? All of these things that he talks about in here. And he says that if the members of the consultative assemblies are inferior, ignorant, uninformed of the laws of government and administration, unwise, of low aim, indifferent, idle, self-seeking, no benefit will accrue from the organizing of such bodies. And so I think that if we build communities wherein there is a free flow of knowledge between the people and the people are facing toward the light and they are trying to achieve knowledge of the revelation of Baha'u'llah, as everybody in this room, of course, already is, then when we assemble together, or even if we decide to form councils or whatever we decide to do in order to spread this message, we can use this idea to make sure that nobody is isolated. If we have a really strong community, right, then we have another community over here where there's just connected by one person and then they're connected over here. This is a little bit weak. And so we could be conscious of the ties between us and how we can make sure that nobody is isolated and how everybody can be brought into the full family, into the full community of the people. So I'm going to read a couple more writings from Abdul-Baha along these lines. Okay, so the first thing that I really wanted to emphasize, which is something that I think about a lot, is that really when we're building Baha'i communities, love is really at the foundation. And I know it sounds kind of trite or whatever, but it is actually a reality. Abdul-Baha says, "Thou dost observe that love among the Baha'is is very great, and that love is the main thing. Just as love's power hath been developed to such a high degree among the Baha'is, and is far greater than among people of other religions, so is it with all else as well. Love is the ground of all things. And so my gamer handle on Xbook is Manifest Love Now. And I think that really like one of our main tasks is just to always manifest love, like no matter what we're dealing with. And that's probably maybe one of the hardest parts of the work in general, in my opinion. So one more. I won't burden you with too many. Okay. O army of God, today in this world every people is wandering astray in its own desert, moving here and there according to the dictates of its fancies and whims, pursuing its own particular caprice. Among all the teeming masses of the earth, only this community of the most great name is free and clear of human schemes and hath no selfish purpose to promote. Among them all, this people hath arisen with aims purified of self, just like what Tyler was saying earlier, following the teachings of God, most eagerly toiling and striving toward a single goal, to turn this nether dust into high heaven, to make of this world a mirror for the kingdom, to change this world into a different world, and cause all humanity to adopt the ways of righteousness and a new manner of life. Okay, one more. This one I find really interesting. He says, souls are inclined toward estrangement. Steps should be taken to do away with this estrangement, for only then will the word take effect. And so it's just really interesting to me when we think about it. I feel that too. Sometimes I get a hermit myself away, right? But if we kind of try to overcome that and try to become part of a more cohesive community where we have a free flow of knowledge and love, I really do believe that we could, and we already are. I mean, I'm preaching to the choir here. We're already doing this. But it's good to think about kind of what we're doing and just to kind of think that, yeah, there actually is a scientific, sociology uses this to actually build stronger corporations, oddly. Corporations use this in order to become more powerful, right? And they will even go in and they'll tell you who has the most social power in your group. Right? It's the person with the most ties that has the most social power. So they actually measure social power by the amount of ties that a person has. But in my view, the goal should be to equalize social power. That's because we all know everybody. And Abdul Baha says, you know, when you meet a believer, it's like you just came into your family member. And I feel that anytime that I meet a Baha'i, even if we haven't seen each other for years and years and years, it's as if we haven't ever skipped a beat. Okay, one more and then I will close. I don't want to take too much time. And if every clan, tribe, community, every nation, country, and territory on earth should come together under the single-hued pavilion of the oneness of mankind, and by the dazzling rays of the sun of truth should proclaim the universality of man, if they should cause all nations and all creeds to open wide their arms to one another and establish a world council and proceed to build the members of society one another into strong mutual ties, what would happen then? There is no doubt whatsoever that the divine beloved in all his endearing beauty, and with him a most massive host of heavenly confirmations and human blessings and bestowals, would appear in his full glory before the assemblage of the world.
Whoa. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Will you read the last part again?
So okay. I can't find it. It's gone.
Really?
Anyway, basically he said, you know, that if we build mutual ties among one another and establish a global council, that then the kingdom of God will essentially appear.
Oh, it said something about standing something full glory something.
Standing something full glory something.
Wow.
Hang on. It's got to be right here.
Well, it is recorded, so.
Was that you,
exists.
Neal, that said if somebody invites you to do something, go do it?
Yeah, he does. He said, you know, if you're invited to a party, go.
Oh, yeah,
If
that's
you're
in the
invited to a
Octos.
gathering,
Right.
go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
If you get invited somewhere,
Yeah.
you should go take the invitation. Yeah, I quoted that.
Yeah. And there was another writing that I also couldn't find where Abdul Baha is talking about how the believers in the West should interact with the believers in the East. And he's talking about how people in the East are really warm to each other and welcoming to one another, whereas over here we're very cool and kind of individualistic. And he said that we should be mindful not to treat people from the East like that because they don't understand, like, that that's just how we are. We're kind of cold and callous as people. And I wish I was looking for that, but I don't have it right now. Anyway.
Well, just keep going forward.
Okay. Anyway, that is it. There's other interesting things that go along with this. But that is essentially what I wanted to share, that if we work to make, central, like really cohesive ties with one another, and we have trust and love, and we have a free share of knowledge, that this actually will give us stronger communities and make us more potent in what we're trying to do.
Thank you, Nefertiri.
Yeah.
Is there a feedback for Nefertiri? Colin?
The last quote that you read reminded me of a simpler saying, wherever two or more are gathered in his name, he will be amongst us. It seemed like what you read was a more complicated version of that, because the glory will be present if we're...
Let me share, since you brought that up, let me share something else. There's something else I was thinking, I'm not going to go into that because it doesn't matter. But there is something else interesting that they have found, and that is that, okay, so he says wherever two or more are gathered, right? Okay, so if there's a two, it's a dyad. There's two. Neal can talk on this better than me. But if there's two people together, that's something really interesting because that's a couple, right? And there's something interesting that just goes on in the couple. But if you introduce a third person, that actually changes the entire structure of the relational dynamic that happens between them. So when you have the triad, there's something completely different that happens than if you just have two. And so I don't know if you could substitute God as the third. So if you have two and then you have God, then you have the third, right? But there's something interesting that they have found with triangles, and that is that triangles can't be cohesive together unless all three of them are positive and connected to one another. And so let's say, for instance, that you have, let's say that me and Zach are friends, right? We're like really good friends. Let's just pretend for a minute that me and Zach actually are
I'm warming up.
He's getting more used to us over the time. And he keeps coming back, so. Okay. Okay.
But I have a choice.
So let's say that me and Zach are really good friends. We like talk all the time, right? We hang out all the time. But then he's friends with Reg. And Reg doesn't really like me, right? And so there's positive ties between me and Zach, and there's positive ties between Zach and Reg, but there's negative ties between me and Reg. They can't last. What they have found is that they're inherently unstable, that they will fail. And so if there's not positive ties in the triangle itself, it will collapse. And so you can think of communities built of dyads and triads because we all interact, with each other. And so if there's something negative going on between two, gossiping, like, how Abdul-Baha is like, never gossip, never talk bad or ill or anything against anybody else, right? Yeah. There's a reason for that. Because they have proven scientifically that it destabilizes communities and destroys the health of the community itself. Because the whole community is built on dyads and triads. And you can imagine this at the institutional level, the state level, so you can go macro to micro for this whole thing to think about the health of society in general. Wow. It's interesting though, huh? Right. Yeah, so I've had friends before, if we put God up there, who's like, oh, God, why do you keep hanging out with God? I don't like him, seriously, I've had people who are really against. Really? Yeah, definitely. Yeah, like, oh, you're going over there, you're talking about God? Oh, she's always talking about God. Wow. It really is hard on a person to maintain a positive relationship with God if they have people in their lives that don't support that. And so that relational quality that happens between people has real implications for how a soul is able to progress along in the cause of God and to keep, because the cause of God is hard to, it there's a lot of tests and trials in the path of God, right? And so if we don't support one another in that, it can be detrimental for people. And we've lost people along the way. I know all of us have, so.
I have something to add.
Yes, go Michael.
I got it.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure I read somewhere that we shouldn't love people for people. We should love people for God sake, you know? So that way it's a total detachment from, people. And we're doing it because they're God's creatures, So, because if you're loving people for them, they might do something mean to you, and now you don't like them anymore. But if you're doing it for God, then it doesn't matter what they do,
Definitely.
Yeah.
Forgive immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Forgive immediately. Thank you.
Howdy, hallelujah. Can I see? Hey, that's me there. Or is it me? Okay, now it's nobody. Perfect. That was my understanding as my introduction to Baha'i community, that there was a feature called consultation. And one of the nice things about it is if you had a thought or an opinion or whatever, it becomes property of the group. And I have to use apparently covenant-breaking bullshit has now been added to consultation. And I had to overcome that in my heart because I spent a lot of time being trained and schooled in covenant-breaking bullshit. So I'm going to use that. I won't say who said it, but it's become somewhat endearing. But what I'm saying is that the Word of God has been revealed by Baha'u'llah, and Baha'u'llah has made a system for uniting the whole world. And one of the major, what's to canalize the forces for that is actually these feasts, among many other interactions that we have. But these feasts among Baha'is are so special because that's our opportunity to put down the cares of the world, be detached from everything that might be, and focus only upon the Lord, and then enter that feast chamber. And it's so marvelous because there can be so much static in the world, and some things do cut to the heart, and someone might not even mean thing. But it's nice to be able to let go of it and say, okay, that's. And I've certainly been offended by Baha'is. In fact, it's said that another Baha'i might be your greatest test, and especially in matters of the covenant. I mean, I'm skipping ahead, but I had a dream before I came here that the person who introduced me to the faith, who I really thought had their act together, was in complete shambles, and I was addressing him saying something like, I'm addressing you by the power of the covenant. I forgot what I said, but it was like, come back. This is really simple. A guardian, a living guardian, is a feature of the faith for it to function. I mean, you could take people who are not Baha'is. I mean, everyone knows who Michael Jackson is. Everyone knows who our president is. It's just part of the human function that it's nice to know that there's someone responsible. I mean, I was a Boy Scout. We had a Scoutmaster. It's really pretty straightforward. But I was glad we brought up feasts because the Sands Guardian, I've studied the Sands Guardian and participated a lot to figure out how do they expand it. And this is some of the same conversation they have. How do we create community? And those feasts and how we live our life. It's just wonderful. It's really wonderful. And you can almost see entire nations coming into the faith. People talk a lot about, I don't like the president, I don't like this or that. Well, he can be a Baha'i too. Well, how did you ever think about that? Those 12 principles apply to your worst enemy. So I think God has a sense of humor, and thanks for the airtime here at your service. Hallelujah. Thank you.
Lovely. Which brings us to Eleanor Rigby. Have you ever heard that song? Eleanor Rigby.
Yeah.
She went to the store and found Baha'u'llah?
That's a Beatles song. All the Lonely People.
All the lonely people.
Yeah, so people tend to isolate sometimes.
Yes, and they actually
that
call
just
them
doesn't that doesn't work.
Yeah, in the network analysis, they'll actually call them isolates. If you have like someone who's over here that's like not in the group, then they're an isolate. Yeah. And there was another writing that I didn't read. Oh yeah, I did read that, where he says we need to work to bring those people in.
Colin, and then we'll come back around for those who've already spoken.
My thought was on the backbiting issue. Just to put it simply, one reason why we shouldn't backbite is because whoever we're speaking to about that person, how do you know that the person we're speaking to doesn't then maybe not even consciously, but subconsciously, oh, that's the deal. I wonder what this backbiter is saying behind my back when they're with their other friends. So you have the nodes and you have the ties, but some people are like breaking a tie, or like if we go back,
negative tie. It becomes a negative tie. Then there's like
right.
negative.
So going back to your analogy of Zach getting along with Reg and you, but Reg and you not going. Would a Zach character then tend to want to belittle Reg to you because that affirms where you're at? You never liked Reg anyway, so if you're like, well, yeah, Reg did this, that was a goof. or when he's talking to Reg, did you see what Nefertiri did? It's just like, wow, crazy. But that's not helpful. It's almost like a person like that would backbite to get support. And isn't that what people do? They backbite to get the support of the other person. Because like, yeah, I'm in agreement with you that person is of a lesser character. Well, that's just terrible. We should build each other up, not tear each other down. And if someone does backbite, or like my mother has a problem with her husband, and partly because he's going what's the word for the A word? His brain is slipping. Alzheimer's. He's early onset Alzheimer's or something. So he just gets really like freaked out. Like, you misplaced the keys? How could you? And it's just the keys. Like, chill. So she kind of backbites and kind of explains to us all the crap that she has to deal with. Well, that's not that helpful. Mom, why are you talking to me about it? Talk to him about it. Say, David, when you go ballistic like that, that's really hard for me and my family. Why don't you just mellow out rather? So those are some thoughts on backbiting.
That's good.
Okay, Zach?
It fits right in there. I think Abdu'l-Baha mentioned it as if a person has 10 horrible qualities, maybe I'm up to 11. Yeah, our duty as Baha'is is to focus on the one positive quality so that they can make progress. Hallelujah. I mean, that's pretty, yeah.
Thank you, Zach. We found the missing quote. Let's read it again. Just the end part, starting with the ties on the top of the page.
I'll start at the beginning of the sentence,
Okay.
at least. Translated by Shoghi Effendi, right? The whole. I'm just going to read the whole thing.
Okay.
Note then, if every clan, tribe, community, every nation, country, territory on earth should come together under a single-hued pavilion of the oneness of mankind, and by the dazzling rays of the sun of truth should proclaim the universality of man, if they should cause all nations and all creeds to open wide their arms to one another, establish a world council, and proceed to bind the members of society one to another by strong mutual ties, what would happen then? There is no doubt whatsoever that the divine beloved, in all his endearing beauty, and with him a massive host of heavenly confirmations and human blessings and bestowals, would appear in his full glory before the assemblage of the world.
Yeah, so no one person, no one human being can reflect the full light of Baha'u'llah. When he made his covenant, Abdu'l-Baha was the temple, and he received the revelation of Baha'u'llah on behalf of all mankind, and he did reflect that. Then after him, Shoghi Effendi was a single successor, and he reflected this. But that covenant, that Kitabiyat said there'd be 2 individual successors, and then the body of believers, the house of justice. And there's 2 lines of successorship, the rod of iron, which is the Alim, the educated and knowledgeable ones, which represents the high priesthood from a Christian standpoint, or the Alim, an Islamic standpoint. They're the knowledgeable ones, the educated ones. Alim means the light, like luminous, or ilm means light. Or they're graduates from the invisible college, the school of the prophets. They're the alumni of the light. And this is who the successorship of iron is. And they are the knowledgeable ones. And this is in the Kitab-i-Ad. And people ignored this. And then there's the line of wood, the lineage holder, which is the point of unity, is not the line of knowledge and authority, but it's a power of union. And he says when these two sticks come together, the stick of iron and the stick of wood, in Ezekiel it's called the rod of Judah or David of wood, and Ephraim or Joseph of many colors of the nations. When these two rods become one rod, it becomes an infallible rod of gold representing the sun and the full light. So after Shoghi Effendi, no one person has the full light of Baha'u'llah tabernacled within them. It went to all the community. They all broke the covenant. They all fell away except one believer. And this one believer, Dr. Leland Jensen, had the stone with 7 eyes before him, and the full light of Baha'u'llah was tabernacled there, because it says the light is Baha'u'llah and the Lamb is the lamp. And when Opal accepted him, there were 2. And when Ethel May Crane accepted, there were 3. And so from that time forward, this full light of Baha'u'llah is only reflected in our international community of the covenant, in all of the people, in strong and weak ties, including our friends of the faith, our family members. We have special prayers that we would not be happy in the kingdom of light if our parents were excluded. So they're just, come on in. There's a prayer that says that our fathers and mothers are just there. We don't have to worry about our grandparents, because if they get in, they'd be sad if their parents were in. So the Mormons spend eternity baptizing all their ancestors back to the fish or whatever, back into the kingdom, in their genealogies they keep. But we don't need to do that. Once we pray our parents in, we can relax, because they'll pray their parents in, which are our grandparents and then the great-grandparents. So every time a new person comes in, this light of Baha'u'llah that we reflect individually doesn't lessen in us, but it increases and keeps growing. And we all should realize that in this new revelation, we should all consider ourselves the successorship and the successors of Baha'u'llah and Abdul-Baha and Shoghi Effendi in this covenant. And the Itra, or the point of unity, or what the Buddhists call the lineage holder, is as important as Abdul-Baha says, as the Isra al-Aswad, the stone at the Kaaba, to see who would obey and who would be okay with this or not against it. And that's it. And so why this is a test to people is a mystery. Having been raised in Judaism, my mother's father is from the line of high priests of Aaron's line, from the house of Imran, the family of Moses. And we were atheists. But being from the tribe of Judah, we were Jews. And Kathy's from the house of Imran also. And so there's different tribes and clans in amongst this, like Native American tribes. And I asked her, well, we don't go to shul, we don't go to synagogue, you say we're Jews, you tell me I'm not a Christian or a Muslim. I was like 10 when I was asking her this. I said, well, what is all this? And she says, well, and she told this from her father, and she says, we've broken our covenant. And Moses gave a 3-part covenant. He says, when you firm in this covenant, you'll be blessed. And then when you break this covenant, you'll be cursed and scattered all over the world. And she says, we're under the curse of Moses. And I was like, oh. So then she left the room, and I thought to myself, what are we, some tribal gypsies or something? We're under a curse? I mean, where's science? What is she talking about? So then later I found out that the 3rd part of Moses' covenant was that there was a promised regathering. And that when the Messiah would show up, we'd be out from under the curse. And that sounded really good to a 10-year-old little boy. So I happened to go to school, and I had friends who were Christian. And I said, well, what's your religion about? I said, well, we accept Jesus to be the Christ. I said, yeah. What is, I don't get it, They go, well, why don't, everybody knows that. I said, well, and they go, what religion are you? And I said, well, we're not really religious, but we're from the tribe of Judah, we're Jewish. Oh, so you know Hebrew. Well, I didn't know any Hebrew. So, and then they said, Christ is the Greek word for the Hebrew word Messiah, which means the anointed descendant of David. Jesus is the Messiah that the Jewish people are waiting for. And then I thought to myself, oh, this is the person that gets us out from under this curse. You have to realize I was like 10. So I go home and I said, hey, guess what I learned at school today? You know that curse you said we're under and why our lives stink? Well, guess what? There's a Messiah who's come to lift the curse. And my mom looks at me. I said, yeah, his name's Jesus. And she's like, no. This is something else. And then I was like, and then that's when I got really quiet. And I was like, okay, something else is going on amongst all the people. I wonder what it is. And then I felt like I was still under this curse. Right? So because of my upbringing, it just really doesn't matter if somebody's broken the covenant and they're under the curse. Because they can always come back under the covenant. What's the hang up? What's all the name calling? What's with all the excommunication? So these feasts we have, Zach, when Dr. Jensen was there in Missoula, we had Sans Guardians coming to town, calling the Baha'i Center, and they all attended our feasts. And we've welcomed people of all backgrounds as guests to our feasts. And, even if they don't accept all 12 principles, they know it's a Baha'i feast, and they're all welcome. And that's what these feasts are. And so because we have a community that has this spirit, and this spirit is not contained in any one person, but because the knowledge is a light that God casts in the heart of whom he willeth, that we have a global community, and it doesn't matter if there's 2 or 3 of us only. There's only 2 or 3 of us. The 3 of us, or the 2 of us, will reflect the full light of Baha'u'llah. And this thing got whittled down to 2 people, Dr. Leland and Opal Jensen. And now there's thousands around the world, and it's growing and going forward. And it makes me wonder what this weak and strong ties are in a triad of friends like the United States and Iran and Russia. And so this is amazing to me. And this year, 2018, is prophesied of in the Holy Scripture, in the book of Revelation. It says that the bride in the book of Revelation was given the 2 wings of an eagle. And it says that this bride in the book of Revelation is the new Jerusalem that descends like a bride adorned for a husband. And so 70 years ago, Old Jerusalem was recognized by the United States on May 14th of 1948. And exactly 70 years later to the day, this year, they decided to move the U.S. Embassy into Jerusalem. Sounds like an act of war. It's provocative, and it's a 70-year prophecy of 3.5 times. So while they're doing this in Old Jerusalem, which brings us to the year 2018, we're going to be doing a New Jerusalem gathering, and we have a map of the New Jerusalem, and we're going to see the sites in the New Jerusalem, and this has never been done before, because we never had the full vision of this before. And Yusuf read the Quran on the way up here, because we're going to see the Grand Mesa, and it's called the Surah of the Table. And Mesa means table, and it's the last surah Muhammad revealed. He says, today I have completed your religion. So we have a vision of this New Jerusalem. And when Muhammad was in the cave of Hira in 609 AD, there's 1,260 years from then to 1869 when Baha'u'llah was incarcerated in Akka. And a centenary and a jubilee later, is 1969, when on these very days here, August 9th, Dr. Jensen had that stone of 7 eyes before him. And the sacred jubilee is 49 years. And 49 years from 1969 is this year, 2018. So these prophesied dates are in the Quran, they're in the Bible, they're in the Old Testament, the New Testament, they're in the Buddhist prophecies, they're in the Mayan calendar, and so forth and so on. So the point of that is, like we were saying before, to quote Victor, that the time is now, that this is being fulfilled now. And what does that mean? People have been spontaneously finding out about this and self-declaring that they're Baha'is all over the world. We've never met them. They found the websites and they've put up their own web pages. We have the True Baha'is of Azerbaijan. It was one of these pages that cropped up. And this is actually happening. And why? Because I think what part of Nefertiri is pointing out is that we have very strong ties between us and God as individuals. And we respect the sacred, holy, haram of the individual relationship and their personal experience with the Creator. And when we get together in groups of 2 or 3, we find our experience of the Creator there. And we break bread, and we have food, and we have feasts, and all of these things. So in that quote, it says that he will appear in his full beauty. Well, I thought Baha'u'llah was in a coffin in Baji. Yeah, his physical frame, and Jesus said his flesh was of no avail. Where's Abdul-Baha? Where's his physical temple? Where's Shoghi Effendi? You're looking at it. This is the temple. Christ said we'd all become kings and priests unto God. God said he created male and female and called their name Adam. This includes women are kings and priests unto God too. And this is the tabernacling of the Shekinah, the presence of God and the Holy Spirit. And we're all feeling this. And we don't even understand what is happening because we stand too close to it. And it's a miracle. Thank you for your presentation, Nefertiri.
You're welcome.
Do we have more feedback for Nefertiri? Yusuf. Thank you for letting me say a few words.
Thank you. Nefertiri, I just want to add something to what you said earlier at the beginning of your presentation. When you spoke about knowing one another, in the community, there's just a verse of the Quran, which I'd like to, quote, and which links in with this, very nicely. So, and then also, interestingly, at the end of the presentation, Neal just said something, and it links in with both. So it starts off like this. It says, "O people, we have created you from a male and a female, and we have made you into tribes and nations and communities so that you get to know one another." And then, in addition to that, he carries on, surely the most honorable among you are those who are the most God-fearing. So I can see a very clear link with the sociological concepts you've actually, discussed, earlier in your presentation with this verse of the Quran. So.
Could I ask you to say it in the language that you learned it in?
Yeah. So normally when we recite the Quran, we actually recite it, with a nice tone.
Do it.
I'm just dying to do this.
We love it.
Yeah, okay.
You're coming up.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم يا أيها الناس إنا خلقناكم من ذكر وأنثى وجعلناكم شعوبا وقبائل لتعارفوا إن أكرمكم عند الله أتقاكم إن الله عليم خبير. So that's the verse in Arabic.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Gives me chills.
Yeah.
Gives me chills.
Isn't
it? Yeah.
Yeah, like nice, warm, loving water.
Yeah.
Just washing.
I don't know if chanting things in the English language is quite as beautiful, but
Somebody's going to figure it out.
if any difference arise amongst you, behold me standing before your face, and overlook the faults of one another for my name's sake, as a token of thy love, for thy manifest and resplendent cause. Thou. And then here, I've always loved this. I didn't have it memorized, but it says, "Intone, O my servant, the verses of God that have been received by thee, as intoned by them who draw nigh unto him, that the sweetness of thy melody may kindle thine own soul and attract the hearts of all men. Whoso reciteth in the privacy of his chamber the verses revealed by God, the scattering angels of the Almighty, shall scatter abroad the fragrance of the words uttered by his mouth, and shall cause the heart of every righteous man to throb. Though he may at first remain unaware of its effect, yet the virtue of the grace vouchsafed unto him must needs sooner or later exercise its influence upon his soul. Thus have the mysteries of the revelation of God been decreed by the virtue of the will of him who is the source of power and wisdom." Baha'u'llah.
I also wanted to just respond to Yusuf, what you said about sociology. when I first started going into graduate school, a lot of people have a lot of problems maintaining their different faiths while they're going through graduate school. It's really difficult, not only because a lot of the things that you grew up with thinking get broken down, and a lot of your like axioms and your values and everything really get changed. And I was laughing one day because I went into the graduate lab, and there was actually some Christians had put flyers in there like, "Are you having trouble maintaining your faith while going through graduate school? Please come and like, we will help you." But I never actually found that. And I don't know if that's because we believe true science and true religion should correspond. So we actually I don't believe that we are indoctrinated into dogmas and different types of ideologies that science is butting up against. And I think that has actually made it better for me going through it, because what I have actually found is that the sociology and the scientific aspects of society and what makes a healthy society and what are crisis points in society actually completely back up everything that Baha'u'llah has revealed. And the two together are actually quite superior for me. So thanks for pointing that out.
Thank you.
You were so blessed, though, with a strong foundation going into it. A lot of people really aren't blessed.
But a lot of people are Christians, I think. And so then sociology there are some pretty harsh criticisms of religion within sociology. Religion is just a reflection of the economic system. Religion is just a reflection of the different ideological components of the culture. Religion is just, we make gods of our own image that then legitimizes our culture itself, right? These are all very true statements. However, I think that we need to overcome the fact that yes, that can happen, and come over here to realizing that true science, and it goes back to the concept of ontology that I was talking about last night, and that is the question of what is real. Is it a reality that God exists and that he is the creator behind all of this, and that light is real, and truth and knowledge and wisdom and all of these things? Is that in reality a part of the reality, or is it not? Are we all just kind of duped and it's all just materialism and there's atoms and they come together, right? But I think that we can bridge those two, because he doesn't say science and religion. He says true science and true religion correspond. And that's very different. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was just something I'd like to add.
Yay.
So, the experience you've had, Niftu, I can remember before becoming a Baha'i, I was going to college. I think what we call college in the UK is slightly different from what you have in the United States. When students go to college in England, they're of the age of 17 to 18. Basically, they finish off their high school when they're 16, and then they have an additional 2 years, so they go to college. And then they go to university for a degree. So that's how it works. So when I went to college, one of the subjects I took was sociology. So while studying sociology, one of the first things our lecturer said to us and mentioned was, if you want to study sociology faithfully and effectively, you cannot assume that something you know is the truth. You have to have an open mind. And you cannot assume this about anything. I think that's what she said. Can't remember, it was a very long time ago. So, but then, this was before I accepted Baha'u'llah. I just made up my mind, I cannot do that. Because there are certain things I cannot let go of. I just have to hold on to them. And I thought I was being faithful to my Islamic tradition then. But then, I think if I had carried on that path, I don't think I would have made as much progress as I have, today, both academically and spiritually. So later on, I accepted Baha'u'llah, and just like the experience you've mentioned you've had, while going through academic studies, you haven't had any problem, and you're wondering why, other students have this problem, or whether they have this problem or not. I had the same experience like you, because I went through very smoothly through my academic studies, and even in my personal and individual research, when I come across things, I never feel threatened. Now, I think this is the blessing of the covenant, of being in this community under the covenant, and I don't think any other community in the world has this.
Maybe not.
To this extent, because everything, like Neal once told me about scientific religion. So what we actually follow is scientific religion, in which both religion and science come together. So this is what I wanted to say. Yeah.
I was going to say something. I was talking to Tyler a lot about it. I think that most people are they don't have relationships with each other. They have a relationship with the image that they think about that person. So it's really just a relationship between two images. It's not an actual relationship between two people. And so if we don't have an image about somebody, then that way we don't, know them completely. So we're always learning about them. So we're always discovering more things about them, instead of classifying them as something and then now, we're going to determine our action based off that for the rest of their interactions, without giving them room. Because nobody gives anybody room in the society we have now. So they say you're this and that's it. There's no possibility to change. Or if you did change, you'd have a reaction, and that leads to more problems. So what I discovered was, well, if you don't have an image about the world, or if there is such thing as an answer to everything, or a universal, the universal house of justice is the answer to peace on earth. If we don't have that, then we have an image of what we think peace on earth is going to be like, which would be inaccurate. So it's like if you take 2 minutes and don't have an image about something, and then you're shown something that's true, you should immediately accept it. There shouldn't be a debate or whatever people come up with to kill time, or they don't want to actually not have that or drop their image of what they're doing. And so so we just live in a society of image makers, and they want to have relationships with image and what they think what they would like to have, instead of what actually is going on. And if they actually just looked at what's going on, they would join the oneness of humanity, and then instead of further isolating themselves through image making. Yeah, that was it.
I think that's such a great point, because I think that not only do we have images of one another, and then we have presuppositions and different things and expectations about one another, we also do that with God.
Yeah.
And I was baptized in the Assembly of God, so I was raised in a Protestant sect of Christianity. And so my image of God, even I think when I became Baha'i, it kind of stuck with me, because we're raised with this concept, right? So we're all sinners, and then God had to send Jesus to die because, he had to make amends for the sinning. And so for me, God was always a little bit angry and a little bit mad, and I'm probably never going to satisfy what God wants me to do. I'm always going to be a sinner, right? And so I just have to keep going to church and paying my tithes because I'm a sinner. And so this concept, I kind of carry it around, and it's still so deeply embedded in there. And I think one of the first times that I really started to just really chisel away at that false image is when I read the Bhagavad Gita, and Yusuf and I were talking about the Bhagavad Gita earlier, but the image that Krishna puts forth of the manifestation and the infinite essence is absolutely different from what I was taught in Christian church. And so I think that's another one of the magical things about the Baha'i faith, because we accept all 9 manifestations of God. We're able to get beyond that one stark image that we have of the Creator and how we're supposed to be amongst each other. So I'm glad you pointed that out.
Thank you. One thing I'd like to point out is in Islamic tradition, there is this teaching about image making. So making images is prohibited. So
Judaism,
yeah,
Christianity,
I was thinking
and
so.
bunch, right?
So many people have different interpretations of this, to the extent where some wouldn't even draw a picture of draw the picture of a living thing, or maybe not living thing, but maybe an animal or a human being. They wouldn't do that, and they think this is going against the teaching of Islam, which is you shouldn't make images. In fact, Islamic tradition actually says that the worst punishment you will be given to those to a category of people among whom image makers are one of them. So image making is something, and I guess like during the time of the Prophet, there was idolatry. So a lot of idols were made and carved, and the Quran talks about it a lot. And this is the idea people have, that these people were making images and making statues, and this is what Prophet Muhammad prohibited. But from what you've said, Mike, I have just realized another interpretation, which seems to be more powerful, of image making. Mm-hmm. So I guess what the Prophet Muhammad is actually saying is don't make those sort of images, of one another, or as you said, nefertari of God.
Yeah.
So this
is more deep. That is deeper. That's really.
Yeah,
that's good.
Yeah. Removal of prejudice.
Exactly.
Could you repeat that last part? I could.
Yes, I was just saying that Prophet Muhammad had actually said, "Don't make images." Yeah. So people actually interpret it in different ways. They think it's making idols is making images, or drawing a picture is making images.
I heard that.
But what I think, from what I've heard from Mike, I've kind of realized a new interpretation for this, for what Muhammad said. What actually Muhammad was saying was, don't make images of one another. And as Zach has said, don't have prejudice against one another, As Nefertari has said, don't actually make images of God in your mind, Don't assume God is like that.
Right. We're doing the same thing.
Yeah, which people do. People do. They're not supposed to.
That's perfect.
Yeah.
I was going to respond to that.
Yeah, go on.
The image we have about somebody in our mind, like what they look like, sound like, all that, right? And then, but we don't have to attribute that to their personality, or which could change. So have it subject to change, basically. So we have to have the image to function. So images could also be the image of God, or whatever God gives for laws and ordinances. So image could be a law, because they're a snapshot of what is going to be an ordinance, or something that's happening in order to function. Otherwise we can't do anything. And then, but they're subject to change, and only God changes His laws. So, we'd have to find that out by reading whatever He says. The same thing with people. We'd have to find out what they are, but we could just keep asking them, if we have a question, and that's determinant on our relationship, which goes back to the original talk.
This is actually the complaint against the idols, is they're statues that don't move.
Yeah.
They're not alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, so exactly, they're static, whereas people are alive. So we see somebody in a hotel, where we get a room in a motel, and we come out in the hall, and we see a guy down the hall, and he's down on his knee, and he's looking through the keyhole. He's peeping into one of the rooms. Then he sees that we see him, and we're like, "Oh, look, it's a peeping Tom." So we go back in our room, and now we've labeled this person and froze them in 1-2 second interval of their entire 70-year life, and so now we have an icon that's static, that's a peeping Tom. We don't know what the person's doing. So this is idolatry that you've pointed out, against the assault against the human being as a living thing and God being a living thing, that's what Abraham complained to them about. He says to them that had the statues, he says, well, I'm not going to tell the whole story, but he smashed them with an axe and put the axe in this hand of the big statue that was still there, and they came there. What happened? And by the time they got Abraham there, he said, well, that big one that all the gods got into a fight, and so the one up there that's the biggest took an axe and smashed them all. See, the axe is in his hand now. They go, what? You liar. You know, these statues can't move. They can't talk. They can't wield an axe. They can't breathe. And then Abraham said, is God like that? And then they said, throw him in the fire. So, yeah, is your neighbor like that? Is your neighbor static? So this is really good, you know, to take this commandment about idols and apply it to the human being that's supposed to be made in the image of what? God. Yeah. So this idolatry, for the first time I'm seeing this, is ruining our self-awareness of ourselves and the way we relate to each other, because they've turned God into a static idol, and we're not in the image of those idols. It said we would be made in the image of the living God. Love, justice, generosity, concord, fidelity, harmony. That's the most we understand of the human virtues. So this is a really powerful teaching that's come out of this talk today that is totally unexpected to me. I've learned something completely different. Now I've got to go back to all my belief system and like take an axe and start smashing half the other things I thought were true. Be a group.
I just also wanted to add that there's another facet of this, not just at the individual level, but when you study, for instance, the form of Christianity that existed before the 1600s, before the 1400s, before Christianity existed in different, very, very different forms before now, right? And so one of the things that one of the famous sociologists did is he went back and he studied like what was the form of Christianity in the 1400s and what was the form of Christianity in the 1500s and the 1200s, all the way back to 300s. It's hard. The further you go back, the harder it is to figure it all out. When I really learned about this in a deep way, I started realizing that we want to be careful that we aren't establishing the revelation of Baha'u'llah in a way that just supports the economic system or the social structure that we have in that time. And I think that that really is a whole other problem that we need to be aware of going forward, is that we don't want to like reproduce problems of our culture, superimpose that on the revelation of Baha'u'llah, and then establish something that actually reifies unhealthy social structures. And so that's always something I'm trying to be aware of. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I was thinking of is we have a tendency to, when we first meet someone or we're first experiencing something, we take a single viewpoint, and that opinion hangs in there. And I learned a long time ago there is good and bad in everybody at all times. It's how you handle that balance that makes the big difference. So when people do that, they make an image, it may not be true. You know, that opinion of someone, but it probably isn't, because it can be tempered by so many other values and experiences and things like that. So that's just what my thought.
Thanks, Barb.
I just wanted to tell you a story. It's a short story, it's not too long. But I think it links in very well with this idea of prejudice or image making. And just before I tell you the story, I'd like to mention, because I work as a teacher, I'm a qualified teacher, one of the things we are taught about teaching is start off every day and every lesson with a clean slate towards every student. So, you know, something might have happened in the previous day with a student. They might have messed about. You might have given them, issued a detention. You might have given them some verbal warnings or some additional warnings, but not to hold any of that, you know, inside you, and just to start off afresh, you know. And I think this links in very well, even in our teaching efforts and in our day-to-day lives. But what I was going to mention, the story I was going to mention, was a story, something that happened during the Prophet Muhammad's time. So one day, the Prophet Muhammad was sat in the mosque, and there were companions. His companions were around him. And then he said, the person who enters the door now is a person of paradise. Basically, he's a person who will gain salvation, and this is a person who God, will grant paradise to. Is a true believer. So everybody was, curious who this person would be. So, a companion of the Prophet comes through the doorway. So another day, the Prophet says the same thing. He sat with his companions, and then he repeats the same thing. He says, somebody will enter this door now, and is a true believer who will go to paradise without any problems whatsoever. So then again, people are curious. Again, the same companion, enters the door. But this happens 3 times, So when this happens 3 times, one of the companions of the Prophet who was sat in the gathering has a plan. So I want to see why the Prophet has said this about this person. There must be something special about him. He must be doing something, special, which nobody else is doing. And this is probably why the Prophet is saying this. So what he does is, there are various traditions, he kind of, brings up a plan. I think he goes up to the companion and says, my dad has chucked me out of the house, and I have nowhere to stay. So can I just stay in your house for a bit, So he actually stays in the house for 3 days, and, that companion allows him. The companion regarding whom the Prophet had said this, so allows that person to stay, So whatever the reason, whatever his plan was, and, but it worked, and, he goes and he starts spending time. And he would properly observe him, throughout the day and at night as well. He would wake up in the middle of the night to see if this person was doing anything. But what he observed was there's nothing special about this person. He wasn't doing nothing. He was just an ordinary person. He's just like throughout the day, he's just doing his own work. At night, he was waiting, because in Islam, there is a special encouragement the Prophet gave to the Muslims to wake up in the middle of the night and worship. Maybe half of the night, or maybe a third of the night. And the Prophet himself used to do that. So he thought that this person might be doing something like that. But, each time he woke up in the middle of the night, the person was in bed and snoring. So he was just wondering, what was the reason. So eventually he got tired, and then he was about to leave. But before he left, he thought, I'd just ask him. So he asked the companion, he said, I heard the Prophet say on 3 occasions that you were a person of paradise. So please tell me the secret. Please tell me what is, the special thing that you're doing. So he says, no. Haven't you seen me? I'm just an ordinary believer. I have nothing special. I do nothing special. I just do my obligatory duties, the 5 daily prayers and fast in Ramadan. That's about it. So he was very despondent and disappointed, and he was just leaving. And just as he was leaving, he calls him back, the companion. He says, okay, wait a minute. There's something, this might be, why the Prophet said this. He says, what is that? Then he says, before I go to bed every night, I just make sure my heart is absolutely clean and pure towards everybody.
Oh.
Every believer. So I thought this links in with it,
Yeah.
Kind of getting rid of.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What was the last part? Just to make sure
I just make sure before I go to bed every night that I have no grudge and no ill feeling in my heart towards anybody. And that's why the Prophet had said that he's a person of paradise.
I love it.
Abdul Baha says that to have good dreams.
Oh, does he?
Yeah. Like you gotta empty all that out in order to receive. If you want to actually have, if you want to invite, some type of spiritual discovery that night. Otherwise, you ruin it.
Interesting.
And it was like sleep in a clean, aerated room, and
Oh, right.
Oh,
Right. That's cool.
sorry. Oh, yeah.
All right, so are we wrapping up then? Any last words from anyone? Okay. Do you want to say a final word?
Just thank you to everybody, because it all it's just such a pleasure to be in a community where everybody is manifesting their own light, and that we are all equals and we share and we love, and it's just such a blessing. Such a blessing. So thanks.
Thank you.